Again, good afternoon. This is Chris Daly and Ron Sadoff from Primary Intelligence. We are now beginning our webinar, Putting Sales Intelligence into the Salesforce. It's a pleasure to be able to spend this time with you. We appreciate very much your willingness to share a little of your afternoon with us. We are looking forward to sharing some ideas around improving revenue generation and sales performance through the use of sales intelligence. We will attempt to answer questions on what is sales intelligence, what are the obstacles, what's the ROI, and how can you make it happen more effectively in your own company. I am Chris Daly. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Primary Intelligence, and am very happy to be here. Ron?
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ron Sadoff, and I'm in Product Development and Product Marketing here at Primary Intelligence.
As we begin today, we'd just like to make sure that everyone has a chance to understand that it's very easy to communicate with us through this webinar. Hopefully everybody is having very good results with the GoToWebinar tool right now. There is a question and answer box that is provided to you in the tool. It should be at the bottom of the interface. You can type questions into this box at any time. We will try to address questions as we go. If you'll let us know what you're thinking or specific questions you have, it will help us to direct the content of the webinar to make sure that it is most effective to you. We will answer questions as we can and take those as breaks permit. Before we get started, we do want to talk a little bit about some findings from recent studies that we have. And in fact, we'll begin this webinar with a little bit of a poll. We're going to talk about or list some sales tools that we have discovered as being reasonably common in the Salesforce. And I'm going to go ahead and put up a poll question asking you a little bit about your experience in your company. That should be coming right up on your screen. We'd like to know from you what kinds of sales tools are used by your reps. And in this case, we're going to assume that phones, office space, emails, and computers are assumed. These are the general tools that everybody should have at their disposal. What specific tools are people using to try to maximize their effectiveness? We'll wait a few more seconds as the polls open. Ron, tell us a little bit about some of this research that we're conducting, trying to understand this space.
Well, one of the goals of this webinar is to kind of discuss how we can make it so that competitive intelligence and sales intelligence in particular become a more used tool in the toolbox of the Salesforce. In other words, making it more useful, more relevant, more applicable for the Salesforce to use on a daily basis, and to actually have something have it be something that they go to when they need information rather than just something that is a nice to have. So in order to get an idea of how we can make this a part of the Salesforce toolbox, we had to try to understand what's being used already. So as part of our own internal research, we talked to sales managers and sales representatives, asking them, what tools do you use? Now, as Chris mentioned, some of these tools like cars, calculators, phones, email, those were fairly common, and so we weren't asking so much about those, but rather those additional tools, those technological tools that sales forces may use and sales managers may use in order to increase their effectiveness.
We're going to close the poll now, and we will show the results.
Okay. It looks like of the results that we had, one of the most prevalent, which is not surprising seeing how the topic of this webinar has to do with competitive intelligence, was that competitive intelligence was used by 49% of those of you who took the poll, followed by spreadsheets, then followed by databases like OneSource, InfoUSA, and then followed by webinars and webcasts. Good to see that. And SFA tools. As we'll see once we get some more people dialed in here when we move on to these findings, these are similar to the ones that were seen when we asked sales managers and sales representatives in our force, with competitive intelligence being a little bit more prevalent amongst this audience, and Salesforce automation probably being a little less prevalent amongst this audience.
Okay. let's go ahead and talk about some of the results from our own study and see how that may differ. Again, the audience for our study being a little bit more potentially sales leadership oriented or sales.
Well, this audience, that we're talking to in the webinar, of course, already have competitive intelligence on top of mind because they're, of course, into this webinar. But who we talk to in terms of sales managers and sales reps were just those people who were on the street. Maybe they didn't know about competitive intelligence. These were just the Salesforce sales managers of several companies, including telecommunications, software, healthcare. And the tool that was the most commonly used by sales management, as can be seen on the slide, was Salesforce automation, which was used by 79% of sales managers. When we discussed how they used it, it was mainly used for tracking performance, tracking forecasting, being able to make better forecasts, being able to create trends for how sales were going to be going, also analysis of how performance was going, and organization for being able to organize the sales force in a more efficient manner. Spreadsheets, which were the second most common, at 70% of sales managers saying that they used it, were used mainly to analyze the data, probably that got pulled out of an SFA. But if not, or even if it were, spreadsheets were mainly used as an analysis tool, Excel spreadsheets, other spreadsheet programs used in order to understand things like win rates and things like that. Competitive intelligence came in third with 56%, followed by webcasts, sales prospecting and tracking, and white papers, which came in at 49%. With white papers, it was kind of interesting because most of the time this was looked at as being an outgoing white paper. In other words, they weren't using white papers for intelligence gathering. They were using their own white papers in order to spread information amongst their sales force or to prospects.
Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at what some of the sales reps might have said.
Okay. Once again, remember that basic tools like a car, office space, email, computers, those were already assumed. So we were looking at those kind of extraneous tools that would add extra functionality. And very similar to what we got from the sales managers in that the Salesforce automation tools were foremost with 82%. Spreadsheets were at 75%. Competitive analysis was slightly higher for sales reps than it was for managers, which is kind of surprising. But that may include some internal kind of or personal competitive intelligence, checking out what the competitors have on their website, things like that. White papers, once again, outgoing white papers, not used as an intelligence gathering tool, but rather an intelligence disseminating tool. Webcasts and workshops were all around the 50%, 48% range.
Okay. Well, the question kind of comes up then. This is the prevalence of use in these tools, but interestingly, we asked the question of which do they consider to be the most important, and from this list, let's go ahead and do another little survey as to what you might think in your company would be the most important tool in this list. And I'm going to open that poll, and I'd appreciate it if people would give a couple of seconds to think about this and to give their vote. If you think that none of these tools would be the most important, I forgot to put an other category in there. If you don't want to vote, if you don't agree with any of these, you might just say no vote, and we'll understand that too. Interestingly, the numbers that are coming back in right now are interesting. We'll share those with you in just a few seconds. Turns out that apparently the winner is SFA, and as you might suspect, that would be a very common and very important tool for keeping someone organized, keeping contacts in one place and to-dos. A very high percentage indicating that competitive intelligence would be nearly as important, and then databases, spreadsheets, webcasts trailing far behind. Well, let's take a look at what the sales reps are saying is the most important to them.
And this was kind of surprising and a little bit different than what the our webinar attendees have said, because Salesforce automation, SFA tools, were listed as the most important tool that the sales reps used in 28% of the cases. But competitive analysis was only cited 3% of the time as being one of their most important tools, or being their most important tool, which means that it was being used by a lot of people, as you can see from the chart before, but as being the most important tool for folks, it was not so important. In other words, it wasn't the tool that was at the top of the toolbox. It was the tool that could be used if needed, but it wasn't one that was seen as being the most important. So part of what we're talking about in this webinar is how can we make sales intelligence and competitive intelligence work as a more effective tool and a more desirable tool to the sales force.
Okay. So in summary, would you say it's fair to say that salespeople want to sell?
Well, one of the things that we talked about in terms of obstacles was that a lot of salespeople said in terms of the tools they use is that they just don't have time to use it. It was really a matter of time, a matter of, look, I don't have time to be playing on the computer, I have to be selling.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when they're thinking of what is the most important tool, they're judging that by what is it that will help me to sell more. Mm-hmm. And surprisingly, and maybe not surprisingly, but a little bit to me, as you were saying, a contact manager, a phone book to them is a more important tool than a plan on how I'm going to win the next deal.
Well, yeah, a lot of the analysis of tools were based upon, first of all, how effective can it be for me right now? In other words, immediate results. Mm-hmm. But also, can I fit this into my selling schedule, or is this more of a task than it is a help?
Okay, all right. As they think about it, they might indicate that they want to work in a situation. They want tools to help facilitate personal contact, relationships, the ability to communicate back and forth, because that's typically the hallmark of a salesperson, somebody that is going to develop a relationship and can speak and communicate. Sometimes I think that, again, that contact management tool, the Salesforce automation, gives them more of a bridge to those conversations than does a competitive intelligence report. Perhaps that's where that's coming from. Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, Ron said it just a couple of seconds ago, but I think it's a very good way of stating it. Intelligence seems important, but is not at the top of the toolbox. It's not what they're going to reach for first of all. So as we discuss today this topic, and again, we look forward to your questions on the topic as we go, we want to identify the benefits of sales intelligence. Is there an actual ROI associated with sales intelligence? Should it matter? What is sales intelligence? We'll even discuss that in just a minute. What are the obstacles to effective use? What are some best practices that companies that we know are using to make sales intelligence a priority and higher use in their company? And how can you implement some of these ideas yourself? First of all, what is sales intelligence? And I've found a couple of different definitions, and then I think I'm going to try and sum up what primary intelligence considers to be a very effective definition. And you might have a different definition within your company. In fact, if you write to us after the webinar and let us know what you're using, that would be fantastic also. CSO Insights, of course, geared towards sales leadership, states that there's a difference between sales data and sales intelligence. And sales data is something that's very common, knowing the name of a prospect, phone number, contact information, things about their company. What is it that they manufacture? What is their structure? These are bits of information that make selling easier. They give you a person to talk to and something to talk about, but they don't necessarily enhance the chances of making a sale. Sales intelligence, on the other hand, provides you with the why and how of selling. Why are they looking to buy? How do they want to buy? What are the things that you as a company need to know about them that will help you to actually move into the sale more easily? A second definition, and this was just something that was presented to me at one point, and I liked it, was sales intelligence helps your organization to identify, understand, and address critical sales issues. So if you can give your sales reps intelligence that shows pockets of opportunity where a market might be heading, giving them the ability to identify value, that's a very useful definition also. I think I'll go with something a little bit more like this. And primary intelligence feels that if you're going to give intelligence, and in fact if you've attended any of our webinars in the past, you'll know that the intelligence that we believe should be gathered and disseminated is that helps a sales team to increase the chances of winning a quality sales opportunity. And that can be, in many different places in the sales cycle. And we'll address that in just a minute. But of course, there are opportunities to find revenue in many different places. From prospecting, is this the right type of client? What kind of things are they looking for? What have similar companies in their industry looked for? To the actual sales process. What are the value propositions to which they'll respond? What are the current needs, and how can we address those with our product or solution? The post-sale, how can we make add-on sales? How can we firm up the loyalty? How can we create a higher customer value equation? All of these are very interesting questions that should be addressed and could be and should be categorized as sales intelligence. The question exists, is there a benefit to having sales intelligence and using it as a company? And I'm going to present some data that was distributed again by CSO Insights. The CSO Insights did a study of nearly 1,300 companies, and they asked the sales managers to estimate what is their win rate of forecast deals. And then they also, at another part of the study, asked them to categorize what is the accessibility of sales intelligence to the Salesforce. Those that have easy access, limited access, or no access. And it turned out there was a very strong difference, very noticeable effectiveness in having sales intelligence at the sales rep's disposal. Sales leaders who believed that they had intelligence believed that they were 8%. There was an 8% improvement, or in other words, from 47 to 55% win rate in forecast deals, and that improvement was based on the fact that they had sales intelligence available to them. Now, what is the ROI of that? Let's imagine that you have two different sales reps. One uses intelligence and one does not. And I know we can't project to individual sales reps, but if we had two groups, or if you wanted to consider two different companies, let's imagine that the average sales rep carries a quota of $2 million and $100K average deal size. Well, doing the math, you would need 43 opportunities for your sales rep with no sales intelligence to achieve his quota. So 43 opportunities with a win rate of 47%, 20 closed deals gives him his quota of $2 million. What would a sales rep or sales group that had access to sales intelligence, those that were 8% more effective, do? 55% win rate brings you 24 closed deals with the same amount of time, the same amount of resources, no extra expenses involved, but now your sales rep goes from $2 million to $2.4 million in productivity. In other words, an increase of 8% in win rate close yields a 20% revenue increase, which is extremely substantial. $400,000 per rep may be a very small number, but if you were to multiply that across all of the sales reps in the company, a 20% revenue increase period, I think would get somebody's attention. So the question kind of is, if there is this potential, why are sales reps not using sales intelligence? What are the obstacles to getting the right intelligence to them so that they can make the most of it and be more effective? Well, some of the ideas that have come to us loud and clear are the fact that time is a resource that sales reps are not willing to spend on a goose chase. They want to be talking to people, they want to be winning deals, and they see talking to people as being the primary activity that will get them where they want to go. The next idea is the format of the intelligence that is provided to them. If you ask sales reps how they like to receive their intelligence, one of the last things that will pop up on the list is in a report, in a long bit of information. They don't want to have to read a long summary to get the information they're looking for. They want to be able to get quick, concise bits of information, and they want that information at the right time. And in fact, that addresses relevance. They don't want to carry around an encyclopedia of knowledge in their head. They want to be able to say, I am in a deal selling this product against this competitor into this industry. What do I need to do today to maximize my chances What are the value propositions that will allow us to be most successful? With this type of information, we've found that sales reps are very willing to use sales intelligence. But if it doesn't meet these criteria, you have a very good chance that the sales reps will continue to go it on their own, and your company will not realize the maximum benefit from sales intelligence. So one of the things that we have to determine is, how do we prioritize our intelligence efforts? And of course, this is very important, I think, understanding the types of intelligence that are going to make a difference. It happens that these are not only going to be the types of intelligence that are most perhaps accessible to get, but they will have the biggest ROI because they will help your company to sell more. And of course, we have our quadrant. If you have the issue of practicality on the bottom, the ROI potential of the information on the vertical, you really want to be in that upper right quadrant as much as possible in your intelligence efforts. If you give sales reps information from the bottom left, the useless, it's likely that they are not going to look to you as a tool or as a resource in the future. If the information takes their time but gives them no benefit, what's the point? Again, you can have practical information that's easy to get in the bottom right, but if it doesn't have an ROI potential, why would a sales rep be interested in that? And of course, there's those tantalizing nuggets, the inside information that might be in the upper left. But again, if it doesn't have the ability to provide an ROI, there will be a certain period of excitement where sales reps are receiving this type of intelligence, but as they start to see it for what it is, tantalizing but no ROI, no ability to help them in their sales, odds are they are going to move away from it. We also want to quickly identify where is the intelligence and where does it reside, and how can you generate the type of intelligence that might be of interest to these types of sales reps. And of course, in the purchase decision, you have the area of prospects, when they make their first purchase, as they live as a client with you, and as they renew with you. And all through here, you have to analyze your company and its situation. Where is your revenue? Where do your sales happen? And where are your sales reps most effective? If you're a company that is sitting on large account bases and you're not actively acquiring new accounts, or at least perhaps that's not your priority, the intelligence you're providing to your sales reps should come from that area that will help your sales reps be most effective at increasing account loyalty, add-on sales, cross-selling, and these sorts of things. If you're a company that's trying to build and having the most success in the area of new sales, the great place to be is to be doing the win-loss during the purchase decision, or perhaps prospect identification. So as we go along, we'd like to talk about a couple of examples of solutions that are providing information in the right place, in the right format, and at the right time for the sales reps. While we go through these ideas, there are ideas that, or examples that you may be able to put in place in your company that would help to increase the relevance and the value of this intelligence to your sales team. Ron?
Well, one of the first areas that you have to think of as a provider of intelligence, whether it's competitive or sales intelligence within your company, is just like your sales teams have to understand their customer, you have to understand what the needs are of your sales reps and your sales managers. And so finding out where in that chart that Chris just described, where are the areas where the obstacles are? Where are the areas where they're running into road bumps? What issues are they running into when they're talking to their customers, to their clients, to their prospects? At what point in the sales process do they need intelligence? That's really the first thing, is understanding that. And once you understand that, then you can start mapping what it is you're providing in order to be relevant to those needs. Now, just as an example, a company that we've worked with, which is a healthcare company in the Southeast, their issue was in the prospect area. It wasn't maintaining customers. It wasn't the win-loss prospect area. It was the win-loss context. It was understanding that first approach. So dealing with them and talking to them about what kind of sales intelligence would be most relevant to their sales team, we understood and then determined that target prospecting would be the best way to help solve their particular needs. by identifying what the current needs were of their prospects, what kind of value propositions would be the most effective. In other words, what were the prospects looking for, what were their buying preferences and their processes, and how did they make their decisions. So it really was, just like you would go into a selling situation, it was understanding what the needs of the intelligence was first, and then making sure it was relevant by having it address those needs.
Okay.
Now, in terms of how that intelligence played out, was through a target prospecting solution. And that was by giving the sales team, by talking to prospects, getting interviews with them, and asking those relevant questions, giving them kind of a lay of the land of what information they could, what kind of prospects were looking for, how they made their decisions, the important information that they would need as they go in. It also helped them understand what the current renewal and defection intentions were in terms of were they even going to be buying. So this was really a great way for the sales teams to qualify whether or not a prospect was even worth approaching. And then also, if they were worth approaching, what were the key selling points or value propositions that would speak most clearly to that particular prospect. Okay. Now, in terms of relevance, this is really important because this was something that the sales team could use immediately. Once they got one of these reports, they could then go ahead and start making their strategizing, and they could start making their plan to approach those particular prospects. Mm-hmm. This was not a case where, that's a report, that's nice to know. This was, here's some information, I can use this when I call this prospect tomorrow. Other things that the target prospecting looked at that had to do with relevance was how was this company perceived by this prospect, so that the salesperson could know whether or not they had to overcome any kind of image problems. Also, as I mentioned before, buying behaviors. How do they purchase? What kind of hoops does the salesperson have to go through? What committees will be looking at this? What people within the organization will be making the decision? And also, how willing is this prospect to kind of evaluating you against your competitors? Okay, not just how do they make a decision, but how firmly entrenched are they with particular brands or with particular competitors? In other words, how hard a job will this be? Once again, helping with qualifying.
Okay. So the end results of this type of this research was their sales reps were not chasing every opportunity that moved, but instead were looking at those companies that had a value need or would respond to a value proposition that they could best address. Mm-hmm. They knew the channel they were going to have to go through to sell. They even knew ahead of time if they were top of mind, if they were number 2, number 3, and in the end, knowing who you should not sell to turned out to be just as valuable or more valuable to them as knowing who would be the most interested and perhaps the most receptive to their advances.
Yeah. And the most important thing here isn't that target prospecting solved all their problems. It was that this target prospecting was itself targeted to the specific needs of the specific sales force. Mm-hmm. So in this particular case, this is what they needed, and this helped solve their particular issues. And the intelligence, in other words, was customized, and the intelligence was fitted to the particular needs of the sales force, which made it relevant. You can't just say this is relevant. You have to see what is out there first, and then find out what would be relevant to those issues.
Oh, absolutely. And I might add, if you'll indulge, this is a service that we do offer at Primary Intelligence, but as you look at the slides, and if you want a copy of the PowerPoint afterwards, you could use some of the information that we are presenting and add it to your own system and perhaps be able to do this in-house if it were something that you wanted to undertake. A second example of providing intelligence to the sales force. This was an example of a sales force that, again, did not want to read long reports. They didn't want to, in fact, in some cases, they didn't want to go through reports as short as 4 or 5 pages. At Primary Intelligence, we produce a lot of information that is win-loss analysis. And our deliverables come in two formats, one being a summary report that is a very long document with all of the information, and the other being opportunity profiles, which would be one published per opportunity reviewed. Even these short 5 to 6 page reviews, we're stacking up on sales reps' desks and were not being read because, again, the sales reps were having to work a little bit too hard to get the necessary nuggets out of it. So what we did at Primary Intelligence was we created a derivative product from our win-loss analysis, which we call Competitive Edge. And it's something that you might consider giving to your sales reps. They took more of the form of a battle card or a win sheet. And the idea was to give the sales reps very concise nuggets of the 5 or 6 questions in the win-loss interview that gave them the best chance of winning more business. For example, the information that was produced in this was based on interviews where our client competed against one specific vendor. So all of the quotes are based on their most dangerous competitor. And the idea was to give them information that they could use right now, quotes that came from the actual marketplace, and most importantly, were based on the perception of recent buyers and evaluators. If the strengths and weaknesses here in this report are included here in these quotes, it meant that this is the perception in the marketplace of our competitor and our client. Some of the interesting information that was there that was very interesting was knowing where the price of our client and the competitor tended to hit in a overall. Were we generally more expensive? Were we generally less expensive? Compared to their budget, how are we coming in most often? And do we need to be ready to support our price with value propositions? With these types of short reports, 1 to 2 page summaries, the sales reps were able to dig into information that was able to help them right now, today, be more effective. How can I sell more effectively versus this competitor? And the results were such that they then ordered more reports based on other competitors in other verticals so that they could be prepared to fight more effectively across the board. Their goal, again, was to increase the effectiveness of the sales reps and be part of that group, like in the CSO Insight report, that was, had the higher win rate based on opportunities in the pipeline. Finally, one last example. The idea was that clients, especially the sales reps, want intelligence on demand. And to that end, this is not necessarily a product idea, but just some ideas that may help you to make your intelligence more likely to be consumed by the sales rep. We found that if you're able to put the information into a searchable intranet, or if you have content management tools already in place in your company, you might allow for the ability to search and find information as needed. In fact, a company that we reviewed a while back, and one that I'll mention, a company, they have a product called Street Smarts, which provided a fantastically powerful forum, I thought, for sales reps to enter their information, share their tribal knowledge, rate each other's information, mark things as outdated or still current, and a reward system for those that are showing expertise and reacting on the data and providing their own spin on what it is. If you have a Salesforce automation tool in place, and most companies do, looking at ways to provide information that is triggered when certain competitors are selected within the SFA, this is again an easy way to provide competitive intelligence to a sales rep if they indicate that they're going to be in the deal with 2 or 3 other common competitors, triggering that response so that they receive an email or they receive information in the SFA telling them how they might best compete is a very powerful tool. And finally, there are plenty of people within your company that understand the competition. Some of them may be currently employed as analysts or as studying the market and have a very good knowledge. You may actually have people within your company who are former employees from your competitors. Of course, you have to be careful not to violate any non-disclosure agreements, but making those people available to the sales reps and giving them the chance to bounce ideas back and forth, you have a very powerful tool in this situation and can increase the willingness of sales reps to look for competitive intelligence and to look for your department as a source of this type of intelligence. In summary, sales intelligence increases Salesforce effectiveness. In fact, I was very surprised to see just what the potential ROI might be. And certainly a 20% revenue increase ought to be enough to get anybody's attention. We know that sales reps will use sales intelligence if the format is concise, if it's presented to them in the right way, and can be accessed when they do want it accessed. And one of the questions that should be asked as you attend this webinar is, how are we stacking up against these criteria? Do our sales reps ask us for intelligence? When we produce, is it well received and used? Do our intelligence efforts make our sales reps more effective overall? If the answer to that is it could be better, hopefully some of the ideas in this webinar will give you a chance to reevaluate, replan, and bring new ideas into your sales intelligence program.
I would just like to add, taking some of this information, they're just basically, as a provider of competitive intelligence for your company or a user of it, there are basically just three kinds of issues that we've talked about that really fit into how do you make it more accessible and how do you make it more of a top of the toolbox tool for your sales reps. And those three key issues are making sure that your sales intelligence is answering specific issues that your sales reps are or your sales management are encountering. Mm-hmm. The second is making sure that what you provide to them is targeted to those specific issues. But there's not a whole lot of superfluous information there, but rather, if they need to know about X, then what you're providing to them is about X. Mm-hmm. And finally, making it accessible so that they don't have to search for this information and that they don't have to read through a whole lot of reports. That's really the key to this, is just finding out what they need, telling them what they need, and making it so they can get it real easily.
To me, it doesn't seem like the path to getting increased sales effectiveness through intelligence is that difficult. A few easy exercises should be able to help firm up the intelligence program and use these ideas that you've presented. I think that's fantastic. As we move to conclude, I'd like to remind people that we do have the question and answer session, and as we take a few of these questions, I'd like to clean up a little, or do a little housekeeping, if you will, as we wrap up. One question before we move forward we received is, how does this scenario play out in a B2B market where the reps know far more about their accounts than any intelligence organization? And that's a very good question. If your sales reps are more in tune with the competition already than the supporting cast, I don't know that you'd have to. My guess is that there are still problems or obstacles that they're encountering, information they still don't have, and if that's the case, it's good to be in tune with them, give them the chance to speak up about what their needs are, and then find those answers for them in, of course, the most beneficial manner possible. And if you truly are in a situation where the sales reps, the sales team know more than anybody else could deliver, perhaps that your question is better solved with some sort of making sure that tribal knowledge is delivered consistently across the group. Mm-hmm. You may not need an outside source of information to fuel them, but you want to make sure that they're sharing that information as well as possible. I remember, I believe it was Rick Page, who's a sales consultant, talking about a system he had put in place once. It was a telephone system. It was really more of an IVR, but it was a chance where each competitor had an extension, if you will, and sales reps could dial into it, and they could either leave information or they could retrieve information. And if they found out something new, they would dial in. They would just leave a short message about, this is what I found out about competitor X. This is probably what I would do in the future. Or even if they didn't have a solution, they might still leave that tidbit. Others could then dial in when they had a need for that information and get up to date and fairly accurate competitive intelligence. Seems kind of cumbersome to me, but it may be a system that works very well in some cases for those that are more likely to use a cell phone than a laptop. We've got a couple more questions we'll try to address here. We will be sending out the PowerPoint after this. There will be a follow-up email that goes out from GoToWebinar tomorrow that will provide you with a link that you can use to download it. However, if you will email me or Ron, and our email addresses are up on the screen right now, we will be happy to send that email to you directly. A question that's also asked, Ron, it says, it would seem to me that direct surveying of customer expectations of particular prospects would be the most useful tool in sales intelligence. Do we find it hard to get real decision makers to take the time to fill out such surveys?
Actually, surprisingly, we haven't found any problems in doing that, because as long as they understand that when they start talking about their expectations, that their expectations are more likely to be met, they can see the value of that.
Okay.
So it's a matter of, it's first a matter of respect. In other words, respecting the fact that they're going to be taking some time to talk to you about this, and so scheduling around their particular schedules. And then it's also a matter of letting them know what the value is coming to them, which is they'll be receiving better service, they'll be receiving the information that they need to make a decision by telling us and telling the company what it is that they need.
Okay.
So really, they do have a benefit from it.
Another question: what kind of effective incentives have you seen that encourage tribal sharing of information? And that's a really good question, because there tends to be, some clicks will group together, some lone eagles will fly alone, and getting them to help build up the group of up and comers can be a challenge. This tool that I mentioned, Street Smarts, actually provided a point system that allowed you to track how much information was somebody consuming versus contributing. And then, of course, the rating scales that went into that helped also to determine how many points each piece of information was worth. If it was being well reviewed and as useful by the sales group, that multiplied the points and created a stronger incentive to provide very good information. And in the end, the sales managers were able to offer incentives and prizes for those sales reps that were seen as being the subject matter experts and were doing the most to contribute in this area. As far as incentives outside of that tool, boy, that's a good question. I'm probably a little bit more of a marketer than a salesperson. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. Any ideas, Ron?
I would think so. If you didn't have a point system actually in place, you could probably have any number of contests. I think might work. The idea of best post of the week. It could be most valuable information provider for a week or for a month. That would have some sort of incentive tied to that. Mm-hmm. Also, another incentive, and this is one that isn't monetized, but positive reinforcement is always a helpful way to do it. In other words, just making sure that if you're in charge of running this, that you thank the people that are actually contributing to it, telling them that they're doing a good job or that their information is very useful. Simply doing that kind of thing really will help people continue those kinds of behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. We'll wait a couple of seconds more and see if we have a couple more questions. Otherwise, we've spent a good hour with you today. To me, this has been a great topic to share. I appreciate your willingness to be here. We'll look forward to having you in future webcasts, and enjoy your summer months. We'll be back with you.
If you have any thoughts or concerns about any of these issues, please feel free to get in touch with Chris or myself about this, because we really would love to hear from you.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and end the webinar now. Enjoy your afternoon and your weekend coming up.